Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture on single rotating reference frame model. In this particular lecture we are going to see what is the single reference frame model, that is SRF model, within the software Fluent and how to set it up and carry out CFD analysis using single reference frame model. First, before we begin this lecture, let us see what is the outline of this particular session. In the beginning we will have an introduction to the entire single reference frame concept. We will see what is the SRF concept, what is the theory behind it. Then we will see how to set up an SRF model problem within Fluent software and what are the applications and requirement of this particular model, what are the solution strategies and post-processing requirements of this particular model. So let us get ourselves introduced to the SRF model. By default, ANSYS Fluent solves equation of fluid flow and heat transfer in the stationary reference frame. That is the single reference frame which is stationary, or inertial reference frame, that is with respect to laboratory it is the stationary inertial reference frame in which the equations are solved. It is advantageous to solve equations in moving or non-inertial reference frame when we consider rotating components. In cases like turbomachinery, such rotating fluid flows are very common, that is flows around blades, impellers and similar moving surfaces. Inherently, such problems, because of the rotating component, become unsteady, that is they are transient or they are changing with time. So to tackle such problem, we define a moving reference frame. Flows around the moving parts can be modeled as steady with respect to the moving reference frame. Once we define a moving reference frame which is moving at the same speed as the rotation of the components, the flows attached to these components can be modeled as steady, because now they are again steady with respect to the moving reference frame, although they are actually unsteady with respect to the inertial reference frame. So for such problem, moving reference frame is defined or selected in cell zones. Because of the definition of the moving reference frame, additional acceleration terms occur, and since we transform the stationary reference frame to the moving reference frame, so this is the way to model rotating machinery flows by defining a moving reference frame. When we consider single moving reference frame approach, there is only a single reference frame that is moving, and that is defined with respect to the entire computational domain. So entire computational domain is assigned to a single moving reference frame, and that is why it is referred to as a SRF or single reference frame approach. There are some geometry requirements in order to satisfy this particular approach, and we will see them also in this particular session. Moving reference frame is with steady speed as well as unsteady speed can be considered in case of SRF model. So as shown in this figure, the problem has a single component which is rotating. If we take an example of this section which is periodic, that is this particular section, so this entire section is actually moving along with the moving component. So we can define this entire section as a CFD domain, and since there are no stationary parts, all this can be considered as a moving reference frame, and it is only a single moving reference frame. So this is an example of a blower wheel blade passage which can be modeled using single reference frame model. So let us try to visualize how the transformation of the stationary frame to moving frame takes place. Imagine a stationary coordinate system which is shown in green. So this is our stationary coordinate system which is shown in green, this particular coordinate system. The CFD domain is the gray block, so this is the CFD domain. Now this CFD domain is having a translational and rotational motion, with translation velocity which is Vt and rotational velocity which is omega. Now we can consider a new reference frame called as moving coordinate system, which is at a distance r0 from origin of the stationary coordinate system and having a translation velocity Vt and rotational velocity omega. So this is our new moving reference frame which is in blue. It is at a distance of r0 from this origin of the stationary reference frame, That particular new reference frame is moving with rotational velocity omega again and translational velocity vt. Now, because we have defined the new reference frame with a translation velocity vt and rotational velocity omega, the CFD domain is now stationary with respect to this new reference frame or the moving reference frame. The new location of the CFD domain is now at r distance from the new reference frame, that is this particular distance. The main reason for considering a moving reference frame is to convert the problem which is unsteady in the stationary frame to a problem which is steady in the moving reference frame. For this, we need to transform the equations of motion to moving reference frame such that steady state solution is possible. Now be sure not to be confused by this concept. This does not mean that all moving reference frame problems are steady state. We can also run an unsteady simulation in a moving reference frame with constant rotational speed. Example is of vortex shedding from a rotating fan blade. The unsteadiness in this simulation will be due to natural fluid instability or vortex generation process instead of the unsteadiness of the blade rotation. Now the blade rotation is taken care by the moving reference frame, so we can also have an unsteady problem within a moving reference frame. Let us consider the same coordinate system diagram to understand transformation of equations of motion. The computational domain for CFD problem is defined with respect to the moving reference frame such that an arbitrary point in the CFD domain is located at a distance r bar from the origin of the moving reference frame. So this CFD domain is now at a distance r bar from this moving reference frame. The fluid velocity can then be transformed from the stationary frame to the moving frame using these equations. These are the two equations that come into effect when we consider transformation of a stationary reference frame to a moving reference frame. In this equation, Vr bar, that is this quantity, is the relative velocity, which means the velocity viewed from the moving reference frame. V bar, which is this quantity, is the absolute velocity, which is the velocity viewed from the stationary reference frame. Ur bar is the velocity of the moving frame relative to the inertial reference frame, and Vt bar is the translational frame velocity. Omega bar is the angular velocity. Omega bar and Vt bar can vary with time. What we need to do after this is to convert the momentum equation, which are the inertial frame momentum equation, to momentum equations considering effect of moving frame. For this, the acceleration of the fluid is changed by additional terms which appear in the momentum equation. There are two ways to write the transform momentum equation. First is using relative velocity as the dependent variable, which is known as relative velocity formulation, and second method is writing the momentum equations using the absolute velocities as the dependent variable in the momentum equation. This is known as the absolute velocity formulation.